Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Graham Baxter with the International Business Leaders Forum here in London. It's my pleasure to moderate our panel discussion here this morning. We are going to be exploring the aspect of cross-sectoral partnerships, which is something which has been referenced repeatedly during both yesterday evening, and indeed this morning, and in particular the challenges which cross-sectoral partnerships involve. That is my qualification, my only qualification for being here. I'm certainly not an expert in the subject matter, the content matter that you all know much better than I, but IBLF has been working on cross-sectoral partnerships for about 22 years. I'm delighted to see that on your website you have much of the materials which my colleague Ross Tennyson and others have worked on over those years, which are practical tools to enable cross-sectoral partnerships to work effectively, and I would encourage you all to refer to those. The Prime Minister at the Olympic event spoke at the Olympic Hunger event at the same time as the closing ceremony of the Olympics back in August, spoke specifically, as is quoted in your agenda, about the need for the sectors to come together and work together on these challenges. He didn't use words such as distrust, toxic and elephants, all of which I've written down in relation to these types of partnership this morning. But nonetheless, I'm quite sure that you all know, especially those of you who have actually worked practically in cross-sectoral partnerships, of the challenges that we face. The fundamental principles, IBLF believes, of partnerships of this kind are there has to be mutual advantage, equity and transparency for all parties involved, and many of those themes have been echoed in your observations so far. But I just want to pick up one thing before drawing on the experience of this excellent panel which we have today, and that is this matter of mutual advantage, or as Kramer and Porter now describe it in their writings, the concept of shared value. We fundamentally believe that one of the biggest problems for partnerships, and one of the reasons why partnerships involving cross-sector players fail, is because that concept of shared value is not brought out for all partners involved and is not explicitly articulated. So perhaps that's something we can look for as we explore these subjects this morning. And I am very lucky to have a wealth of experience on this panel. We have 5 panelists and we have not much time, ladies and gentlemen, so I will encourage you to keep our discussion, because I hope this will be a discussion, to brief observations and inputs. The panelists' biographies are in your packs, all but for Sean de Cleene. Sean has very kindly agreed to join us at quite short notice, and I'm delighted to see him here because actually he's the only private sector representative on the panel. And I thought it to be quite important, given that we're talking about business engagement, to have a representative. So no pressure there, Sean. You speak for the private sector. We'll come to you in a minute. If I may start off, though, Paulus, by turning to you. Paulus, you have actually experience in all 3 sectors, I think it's fair to say, and probably more than that, in fact, if we include academia as well as civil society as a specific sector. I wonder if you could speak from your practical experience to examples of where cross-sector partnerships have come together to deliver nutritional outcomes, and perhaps as you're doing that, draw on that experience to share with us some of the challenges and how they've been overcome.
Maybe one word before. I hope to be short and concise, Chairman, but coming back to what Jay was saying is people lost faith in what their future is. And I must say, when I go back to my country here in the Netherlands, I mean, the people in the Netherlands lost faith in development cooperation also, because they're cutting back significantly on the money set aside for development cooperation. So first thing you need to do is to restore this faith internally before you actually can go externally here. We are a country, of course, and we do that, of course, by having clear policies and practices and making sure you're creating value through creating measurable results on the spot, on a limited number of countries, on a limited number of subjects. Food security is one of them here. And we have an historical, let's say, practice in my country here that we work always in partnerships. We call that, I don't know how to translate that, polderland. If somebody explain that in English here. Polderen. So that means we're trying to negotiate something which is the best of all. And that's the basis here, this is the way we work here. So we firmly believe that if we are, with developing cooperation, stimulate, let's say, not only help, but the economic development, you will need to do that with the private sector. So you need to have a program where these partnerships actually evolve. And maybe a good example is, for example, if you want to, you need to set up, let's say, a public-private partnership facility where you invite companies and other partners to come together and to draw up common programs in developing countries which would bring that return on investment. I mean, a social return and an economic return. That's very, very important here. I would guess that the Amsterdam Initiative Against Malnutrition is such an example. It's a broader framework where you will see a, let me say, a rack of activities which on first sight are not connected, but they are all geared to improving, let's say, nutrition security here in a set of countries. This is an experiment where you see that companies and different sectors are holding hands in progressing forward, because it's not a blueprint how to do that, but learning from each other collectively here is the way forward. And I must say, if you did this here, you would create, let's say, a new inroad in tackling that. So it's not just one company with one NGO in one country here. No, you're moving, let's say, collectively with a set of industries here, set of NGOs here, to one common goal, and it is reaching more people with better nutrition. That's an experiment, but if it works, I must say, then it is, I think we're doing extremely well here.
Now, Paulus, that's a really interesting and practical example which you brought to our attention, and brings to the table this concept of shared responsibility, which was an expression explicitly used by the UK Prime Minister when he made his statement back in the summer. The trouble with shared responsibility is it's shared, but no one is responsible. So how do you convert this high-level objective, which we all share passionately, into specific measurable outcomes which benefit each of the partners in that partnership?
Yeah, you know, for some people, having a partnership is an end goal, but it is a starting point. It is a starting point where you lay out clear is what is it you want to achieve individually, but also collectively here. So if you're able to share that, and there are no surprises, you build on that a particular plan here, which responds to the individual needs and the collective needs, focused on nutrition security. I'm talking about a social return and an economic return, always go hand in hand as two sides of the same coin here. That is an investment in itself. That's not a quick fix. I mean, I worked hard when I worked in Unilever to get a program with the World Food Program, and I see Martin Bloom sitting over there. It took us a year to agree actually what we wanted to achieve. And Martin van Lieren, who I worked closely here, know that. I mean, it was a hard work to say, well, there are two to tango here. So what's in individually, what's in collectively? It turned out to be a great partnership here, but you need to build that investment. And Charlotte Pedersen, who runs the AIM project in here, knows that by heart. It is hard work. But if it works, it delivers, then it brings back a lot. I mean, for business, for society, and particularly for the receiving society where you're doing it for, because that's an integral part of your partnership, because you should not lose out, let's say, those for which you're doing the efforts.
Thanks, Paulus. Sean, if I can come to you now. You're the Senior Vice President of Global Initiatives, Strategy and Business Development at Yara, the global fertilizer and agri-products company. I know you've had a lot of practical experience working together with governments, civil society, donor organizations on trying to achieve outcomes which are directly relevant to your business. So, just as Paulus has said, good for your business and also good for society in terms of social benefits. How do you get over the frustrations which occur? For business, results are everything, Time is money. And at the end of the day, if there isn't a profit, what is business doing in there? The processes and the patience that Paulus describes necessary for these kinds of complex partnerships, how do you do it? And what have you learned from your experience?
Well, I think, from a business aspect, the challenge is that it's balancing a patient sort of view of the world. If we're going to work, particularly say in Africa, you're not looking at that you will be able to transform things in 6 months. You're looking at a longer term strategy. But at the same time, businesses are they have a shareholder base and they have to return an investment on that. So it's finding that balance. And I think traditionally that's been done through more classic public-private partnerships, I would say, where you have a specific skill set that you can bring, or you've got a specific niche that you need fulfilled, and there's somebody else who can solve that problem in your supply chain, or you can provide a CSR function on the other side. But there've been more what I would call, losing my microphone here. More what I would call sort of just one-on-one public-private partnerships. I think the agenda, the space we're in now, requires a very much a business as unusual approach and a much more transformational one. One-on-one is not going to make it now. It's going to solve a particular set of issues for you in your supply chain. And I think for a lot of us now as companies, this has been the challenge, is how do you move from traditional public-private partnerships into transformational partnerships? And that requires a cross-value chain thinking. If you think, from talking World Food Programme, Unilever partnership is tough. Just trying to get the value chain, private to private partnerships are tough. And trying to find that pre-competitive space that you can actually all work together to develop, to do something which has a much more substantial impact. So, a lot of the work we've been looking at recently is, have been working on things like Grow Africa, which is, not taking a classic PPP view, but taking a country or a corridor or a large cluster and looking at how a group of players, public, private, government, business, local business, international business, donors, governments, local communities, smallholder farmer associations, and academia can work together to actually towards a common vision, which means we're not going to agree on everything, but we are going to find that common purpose where we do agree this is what we want to work on. And therefore looking at how you bring about your different skill sets to really create that transformational agenda.
Sean, I think you're the co-chair of Grow Africa, one of the co-chairs, is that right? So you have very great experience of this. So how do you keep everybody on message? How do you keep them at the table? Do you have to find ways to connect their specific interests with the overall agenda? What's the experience from Grow Africa?
I think, a critical dimension of Grow Africa is the concept of leadership. Last night you talked about that a movement needs movers and shakers. I quite like that. And you need lots of movers and shakers. And this is true. You need real leadership, but you need that high-level leadership. So you've seen several heads of state, President Kikwete in Tanzania really step up and take, what is more classical leadership and real ownership of this. But it's also required a number of champions. Below that, if I continue with the Tanzania case, you would have, the head of the Agricultural Council of Tanzania, the head of the Prime Minister's office, in the government side, the Minister of Agriculture, certain local NGOs, have really taken ownership over this agenda and really championed it and made it their own. And I think that is the second part of that's been the success of this, because I think business responds to that leadership. And then looks to then bring its own leadership into that. I think the second aspect is around that issue of ownership. Grow Africa has very much been owned by those countries themselves, and I think that's going to be critical to the Sun movement. Jay talked about it earlier. Okay, you've got 33 countries, but you might need a lead group of companies that are really spearheading this. And that was the whole framework behind Grow Africa. It wasn't let's try and take 53 countries. It was a self-selecting group of countries that themselves really set their agenda for what they want. And then that ownership has to have both at a national level, but it also needs that local level buy-in. You know, in Tanzania, there's been a lot of work over the last 12 months out in the agricultural growth corridor that they're working through to actually look at what does that mean for the people who live in that corridor. Because initially this was something that was just being done with a lot of momentum and gusto at big global events at the UN General Assembly, at Davos, at events like this. And as Jay rightly said, you don't create a movement at events like this. You know, that has to be owned at a local level. And so a lot of it has been creating that energy on the ground and translating that into a business reality. I think that's the final point. At the end of the day, this can't be just a nice vision. There has to be scale. It requires new models being developed, new business models that haven't been tried. It requires trust to look at trying out and working together to develop those models in harmony. And because a lot of the models don't exist that are required to go to scale. And the traditional way of doing business will need alteration. And that requires working together to figure out what those new dynamics, those new models are going to be.
Excellent. And we had that terrific input of leadership from Paul Polman last night, of course, showing, inspiring us, I think, to stick at it, even though it is tough. So thinking global and acting local, and the emphasis of the Sun network on the 33 countries, a natural cue for us, Terry, to turn to you, if we may. Kenya is a country where this stuff is happening on the ground, and you are one of those inspirational leaders very much involved in this. From your experience, can you tell us a little bit about the local challenges of making these cross-sectoral partnerships happen on the ground where it really matters?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Maybe first of all, I'm Terry the lady, or the woman. Yesterday we had Terry the man here. So today this is Terry the lady from Kenya. And it looks a good name for nutrition. So Terry, wherever you are, I think we can greet this morning. And also I acknowledge today I came with our chairman of the Kenya National Food Fortification Alliance, Mr. Nick Hutchison. I think you're around there. So what we can say is that as a country, we have actually embraced public-private partnerships earlier than even the Sun movement.
Sari, I think they just need to adjust your microphone a little bit. It's getting some bad feedback. There you go. Thank you.
At Independence, we had very high levels of goiter rates. And using the salt industry, we were able actually to reduce and that an impact on it. Now we are at 6%. So from 63 up to now, we have made tremendous progress through this partnership. So it is something that is not new to the country, and it is something that now with the scaling up nutrition movement, we are actually now expanding that concept. And personally now we have been able to come up with a national program on food fortification, where we are fortifying local staples, mainly oils and flours, with the vital micronutrients to be able to impact on the micronutrient deficiencies. The challenges we've been having really, first of all, was defining the partnerships and the mode of engagement. But the way we've gone around it is that we've not been engaging with one particular company, but rather requiring that the companies who are in that particular sector, they form an alliance. In the salt iodization, they formed the Kenya Salt Manufacturers Association. And then government comes in as a critical member to be able now to strengthen the partnerships and the way they are going to implement the program. With the food fortification, we have now done the Kenya National Food Fortification Alliance. And again, this is an alliance and an open forum where all industry players have an open membership. We do not restrict. And government, again, is the secretariat. So together through this, the challenges that we go through, like standard formation, demand creation, we are able to be able to chart our way forward, and they're able to produce quality products for our people. So with the formation of platforms where people can come and talk their minds, you are able to overcome many of the difficulties and the challenges that you will have for implementation.
Terry, that's very interesting. So you have created here clearly a platform of trust where the parties are coming together to apply themselves to mutually solve these problems, hopefully thereby achieving something for each of the parties. How have you overcome this mistrust that we've been hearing about, this mistrust between government on the one hand looking at business only there to make a quick profit and to effectively exploit the opportunities, and on the other hand companies looking as if government are trying to get something from them for nothing? How have you managed to create this atmosphere of trust, which seems to be your platform?
One of the approaches, in fact the key approach that we have taken, has been actually defining the problem we want to address. Is it a problem of public health significance? There was a survey that was done earlier to determine the prevalence of iodine deficiency in the country. It was determined it was a problem of public health significance. Therefore, we needed to engage with industry. We did another one more comprehensive in 1999, and we determined that we have vitamin A deficiency, we have iron deficiency as problems of public health significance. And what are the interventions? One of the key interventions is food fortification. Who will fortify this food for us? Definitely not government. We never have industries to fortify. Who does? Industry. Who is involved in this? We have the millers. We have the oil producers. Can we bring them around so that collectively we can then be able to address this problem? Then we see, how do we do it so that everybody who is involved in this sector actually does it? Then we go for legislation. We have mandatory legislation for salt iodization. We now have mandatory legislation for fortifying cooking oils and flours. So now the mistrust is not there because we started from the angle of defining our problem. We only invited them on board to come and help us solve a problem that had been already been identified as a public health priority for the country.
Yeah, being very, very specific about what you come together to address. I think there's a really important lesson in that excellent example. Thank you so much. If we could turn to Bangladesh, Mr. Kabir. Unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to meet or to talk beforehand, but of course Bangladesh is another one of the 33 member countries. And Bangladesh, a very interesting and different national context in terms of the role of the private sector, the very, very strong role of social enterprise and indeed non-governmental organizations, and a long history of working in quite close collaboration with government. So very interested to get your perspective and perhaps some examples drawn from your Bangladesh experience of how the private sector can work effectively on these challenges.
Thank you. I think in terms of nutrition, we find that it's really a very big challenge because we have been in Bangladesh, we have been able to achieve a considerable degree of success in reducing maternal mortality, in child mortality, and also addressing, but we find that nutrition remains a very big challenge, and even in some sub-targets of nutrition, it might be very difficult to achieve. So we have been trying to achieve a quite a degree of success in nutrition, and we find that really it's a truly multi-sectoral issues. I represent Ministry of Health, and we also from Ministry of Health, we try to address the nutrition issue, both from clinical level, from public health perspective, creating awareness and providing inputs where necessary. And we find that there are really roles of different actors there, like the NGOs, as you have mentioned, is a very vibrant sector, and also working in the nutrition area. And also private sector is a very important player because, and we have lots of experience in salt iodization, where GAIN has also worked. And we also trying to, even if you look at the private sector, they are also quite innovative and forthcoming with different ideas even. You have seen that Even one industry tried to fortify iron, but unfortunately the color of the iron changed. They had to discard it. But if we see that there are lots of really interest, and from the government, we think that we acknowledge that we have to have very good dialogue, and we try to encourage the private sector and all other sectors, all other players involved in it. So in fact, we are going to have programs for oil fortification, and also that there is also a school feeding program in our country, also assisted by GAIN. And importantly, I think as we go along, it's becoming important that when we provide like micronutrient powder and others, and it is not really, the government is not, doesn't have any industry, as has been mentioned by Kenyan representative, and we have to engage the private sector. And I think that if it is done through as a part of CSR or corporate social responsibility, or even from business model, we said there are business models are also working, because we see that even through contract farming or others, and through provision of other inputs, it's happening that it's really when it is targeted, because for our program from the government, it's really pro-poor, because the nutritional problem really is happening at the below poverty line people. And even when the people are coming out of poverty, the same amount of outcome is not visible in terms of nutritional status. So it has to be addressed from different angle, and so micronutrient powders and others. Also, the private sector is very much active, and we try to encourage them. And we are also going to have we also have some legislations like for advertisations and others. But I think if we can work with private sector closely, and we are hopeful that we can achieve, and all other sectors can work there, and we can achieve a much better outcome within a shortest possible of time. Like from Ministry of Health, we have National Nutrition Services within our sector-wide program, which tries to address in the multi-sectoral forum. So we provide advice to ministries, even we have engagement with private sectors, where we wish to provide, and we'd like to provide, we have programs for provision of services, but we also have programs for IUICF and others, and things like that.
Thank you. You, as a member of the government, effectively of the civil organisation, the government's implementing agency, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, you have sort of dual responsibility. You are the regulator on the one hand. You set standards. And government and companies will respond to those regulations in one way. But now you're also talking about partnerships with a much more engaging and interactive kind of relationship. How do you switch from the role of regulator to the role of partner? And does that pose particular tensions for you in Bangladesh?
No, I don't think so, because I think we expect the private sector to operate within the boundaries of law, and because the ministry is principally there to set the policies. So if all can work within the boundaries of set by the policies and others, like we have had discussions recently, that what kind of micronutrients powder, what number of micronutrients should be there. And so there can be agreement because the government tries to have a national policy which is for all the people. So we try to see which will benefit most all. And in that case, I think the private sector can be very innovative, because they can experiment a lot, and we can work with them. And definitely I hope that if their programs are for poor, and if that in fact matches government objective, I think there cannot be any tension, and it's possible to work with them. In fact, our minister, or even we participate in many meetings and others, And so I think it's possible to work
Excellent.
without tension.
So you can play the role both of poacher and gamekeeper at the same time. Tom, that's a perfect excuse to bring in the voice of the NGO, your CEO, Concern Worldwide, and you have, I think you were there at the Food Hunger Summit back in the summer. You've got, must be tons of experience of working in these kinds of partnerships, but coming at it from the perspective of civil society, from the perspective of the NGO, how do you see engagement with the private sector? What are the risks, what are the opportunities, and how do you overcome them?
Well, I think we need to talk about this at the global and the national level. At the global level, the whole Sun movement is clearly constructed. It was mentioned this morning by Jim Harvey about the three wheels, and the three wheels being civil society, government, and the UN sector, and now the private sector to come on. So, I mean, the sort of interactions that are at that level, there is a big opportunity. I mean, this is the first time, I think, that we've got to the point where you have these four major stakeholders committed to working together towards a broad common objective. But we do have to overcome the sort of issues that Mark very honestly set out in his opening comments this morning. So that's at that level. The other opportunity, and this again, Jay rightly referred to it, is at the national level. Because really that's where this is the acid test as to whether we're going to achieve results or not. We do have, I think, a number of genuinely committed government leaders in Africa who are committed to the Sun. And bit by bit, structures have been put in place to bring together civil society and business sector in these countries to see how they can work together. I think it is of critical importance that civil society is facilitated, civil society, both international organizations and local organizations, is facilitated to play an optimum role at country level. Because unless that happens, again, it's not going to work. And again, the same basic principles that need to apply at global level, listening to each other, mutual respect, clarity of purpose, all of those things need to be in place.
So again, the emphasis on making it happen locally, and I'm interested. I mean, we tend to sort of focus, especially at events like this, on the big multinationals. Frankly, they're the ones who can afford to come to these kinds and indeed support these kinds of big events. But again, locally, you may well work with the local partners of the multinational, but you'll certainly be working also with local companies, local private sector. And I want to come back to you in a second on this as well, Terry. So how do you bring them in? I mean, so you know, Paul Polman will deliver Unilever, probably in any country where he works. But you also need the engine of economic growth, the local enterprises, the small, medium-sized enterprises. How do you bring them in?
I mean, there's no standard solution to this. I think it's about the situation on the ground in each country and seeing what level of interest and engagement you're going to get from the local business sector. I do think having a government that's sufficiently confident and has the capacity to provide, if you like, to set the rules of the game is very important. And Terry's example of Kenya here seems to be very interesting. Tanzania is a place where this, I think, is definitely happening at the national level. But then when you go down to local level in Tanzania, the knowledge of what Sun is about is extremely limited. So you have to actually be prepared to invest in that and put in place structures and engage with local civil society to say, this is what we're about, this is the role you can play. And that's the context where you may create the conditions for success.
A confident framework.
Yeah.
Terry, so in Kenya, do you find that you are able to bring in local private sector players, not just the big multinationals, and what have you learned from that experience?
Fortunately, the foods that we have actually fortified, for example, in the salt industry, we have only 5 industry players, and they're all local, and they're major. So they are easy to organize and bring on board. We did not have a big problem. But as we have moved now to cereal flours, we are going now to face that challenge because we started with the big millers. Many of them are local also, but because of legislation now we have to go to the smaller millers. But what we are doing is that we are going through their alliances, because even the small millers have an alliance which is already there, known as the Small Millers Association. So we go through their associations to be able to engage them. And in this way, we bring them onto the general platform that we are also having at the Kenya National Food Fortification Alliance. So through their already established networks, we are able to engage them. And at the alliance, we have a code of conduct and we have a frame of engagement, guided by the standards and also guided by our main objective of reducing certain micronutrient deficiencies. So so far we have not had any conflict of interest, and neither have we had any difficulties that we have not been able to surmount, because it's an open forum where we are able to discuss our issues.
It sounds increasingly as if we should all move the next conference to Nairobi, because we clearly have a huge amount to learn from you. I am keen that the audience who has been sitting still patiently for 2 hours has the opportunity now to ask some questions and to make some observations. I would encourage you also, if possible, to keep your inputs very short. So if we had a question, if you could state who you are and what your question is relatively concisely, or maybe you've all gone to sleep, is the other possibility. Okay. Do we have a question from the audience? Or an observation? There's one at the back, thank you, and then there'll be one here. We'll take both of those if we may. The microphone over here as well. After you.
Yeah, Steve Collins from Valid. I would like to ask about the difference between the sort of single nutrient fortification of staples, which Terry's been talking about, and the actual complementary feeding. You know, the Sun movement is focused on the 1,000 days, and we know that having effective complementary feeding in the first 1,000 days, you know, requires proper complementary foods. And I sense there's a sort of difference. It's much easier to get single nutrient fortification than sort of multi-nutrient complementary foods. I just wanted to get some opinions on that.
So we're only just hearing you up here, so can I just get absolute clarity on the question? Sorry.
Yeah, it's the difference between single nutrient fortification of staples and multi-nutrient fortification of complementary foods, which seems a far more contentious, sensitive issue in terms of the public-private partnerships. I just wanted to get some perspectives on that from, for example, Terry, etc.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. It's quite difficult to hear. Do we have another question over here? Do we have a microphone there? Sorry, just the one now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm of course intrigued by the principle of cross-sector and cross-everything coordination, consultation. What the Dutch representative said about the Netherlands, I think is quite accurate. In the Netherlands, there was a clear report of the government criticizing itself on its own development cooperation policy. There was a report published and it said, we have managed with our development cooperation aid to keep dictators in power. That was a very big confession. So now that we see development cooperation funding going down, there's a benefit in it because we can review what we've been doing and make it much more effective. In Europe, thanks to the support of the French government, a report has been published. It's of the Court of Auditors, and it said about DEFCO's development cooperation funding that it was dysfunctional and disorganized. And we're talking about an enormous amount of money, our money, tax money. So we have a beautiful opportunity, all of us, to revisit what we're doing with development cooperation and what the role of industry, that has always been very critical about this, actually is. This is no longer a left-right divide issue, and as a consequence, we should at this moment be able to step over these more or less ideological issues and really get into a dialogue And if you look at what the positions are of the NGOs today, this is where I go with my question, they are much more open to cooperation with industries than ever before. Of course, their budgets are now limited because of lesser development cooperation funding available. They want to work with industries, but where are the platforms that allow us to do that? Where are the structures? We all know that in development countries, if you don't have a structure, whatever you do will be temporarily. Unless you build the structure, you will have a sustained effort. Now, where are we with this community, the business community, and all the others in building a sustained, structured, cooperative platform where people, each in their own place in the value chain, coordinate? Governments, donors, and recipients, they're all here today. So how are they coordinating? How are they coordinating, strategizing throughout the value chain? May I ask the views of those in the platform? Thank you.
Didn't catch your affiliation, so could you say who
My
you
name
are?
is Rio Praning, Peer International.
Thank you very much, thank you. We are really struggling to hear clearly the questions. Feedback isn't working terribly well. But if I could take the first one, it seemed to me to be quite a technical question. Tom, would it be fair to point you at the challenges faced between single and multiple nutrition?
Well, actually,
nutrients?
I think it is quite a technical question. And I'm looking over there at Martin Bloom. I think he's better equipped to answer it than I am.
Deferred to the head. Would you care to take it, Mark? Microphone, please.
Depends on the carrier.
It did feel very technical to me as a non-nutritionist.
Well, okay, it is a technical question, but it's extremely important because if I look historically in the field of nutrition, like 20 years ago, we were focusing on vitamin A, iron, iodine, and we call that the type 1 nutrients. But for the problem of stunting, actually we have to focus also what we call the type 2 nutrients, like calcium, things which are much more difficult to package in a pill or in a powder. And I think the question from Valid International was very, very, very important, because when you talk about the new type of solutions, like the complementary feeding products, what are absolutely essential in the first 1,000 days, between 6 and 24 months, the private sector is absolutely essential. And that partnership is very different if you talk about only fortification of food. And this is something we are struggling with. It's also an elephant in the room, because the code, which is really important for the exclusive breastfeeding field, is important, but some of the times the code is used also for the prevention of marketing of complementary feeding products. And it's something we need to discuss to move this field forward.
Thank you. That sounds to me like a topic in itself for a further workshop or panel to look at the very specific challenges that you say the private sector essentially must play in this particular area, and I think that's something that could be gone into. Paulus, there was a question there from the floor about sustained structured cooperative platforms and how we build them. You were speaking to one of those in your example. What have we learned, and how can we do more of them?
Well, the critics, of course, you heard in my country is, are you effective enough in spending your money, let's say, in recipient countries in here? And that's a valid question, because so far we have not been sufficiently effective, in my view, in what we do. And that is what we need to do, is to make sure that we are finding local solutions for local problems. Those issues are not being solved in The Hague, where I sit, but in local countries. And there's not a blueprint here, so you need to gather, let's say, the key players who can build that solution on that particular problem here. That requires also a limited number of players. We can't play football with 30 people into one course. It's chaos. That's what you find sometimes in countries here. So if you put people central, it is important you put people and society central. What are the needs and wants? How do we serve those needs and wants, and who is needed best to solve it, from the public and the private sector here? If you build it from there, you put people central, and not, let's say, from a value chain, agriculture, and in the end of the day, you have the consumer somewhere in the end here, turn it around. get people more central here, and start to listen to who can make that contribution. I mean, you see, Tom and I are nearly wearing the same tie. Next time we come up in a team here, we talk in the same language. That is basically what you need to achieve. So we started first. This starts with listening first, as to what are the other sectors up to, what they want to do that. So if you start to listen and appreciate what partners go here, then you can start merging, let's say, your interest in something which may work. So clearly, locally, you can define and you need to facilitate from The Hague in my country here to construct, let's say, the best parties together into a country with society. You're finding these solutions. And that's exactly what we're doing, for example, with the Amsterdam Initiative Against Malnutrition. So you have a consortium, let's say, from players, both multinational but also small and medium enterprises. Don't forget that, because multinationals are important, but it's about a local economic development you want to stimulate here. You need to develop, let's say, a local entrepreneurship. So my country have established what they call, in a generic name, revolving fund of 700 million euros to stimulate small and medium enterprises in developing countries here, because there is a driver actually for growth. And with that, it will come with prosperity of the local communities. That's the way to go.
Very good. Thank you, Paulus. We're coming to the end of our time, but I do want to give the rest of the panel a chance for closing observations. Sean, you had a thought on this.
Just to build on what Paulus said, I think a critical importance as the Sun movement goes forward is this idea of leverage. How do you leverage donor and government finance in such a way that you really, if you want to get the private sector in, you need to catalyse that space and to create a pipeline of innovation, of new business models, of scalable solutions. But they won't necessarily happen in a void. And so if government is putting money into government-only programs in a traditional kind of way, and it isn't leveraging that money to really harness that power of innovation and scope, but at the same time using that leverage to create some conditionality, to create some, to create traceability, to create some of the frameworks that Kenya are doing. I think it's a very powerful combination, and we haven't cracked that one at all in terms of how do you really leverage finance. I think the Dutch and probably the British government are the two at the moment that are really starting to look innovatively about this. But if we could do that. The other thing I just wanted to on my closing thing would also be I think a plea to also not silo what we're doing in nutrition. I think Minister Connolly talked about what was going on in climate change, and I think this is terrific that the Irish are making this link between food security, nutrition and climate change, because if you really take this down to a local level, it's this crunch, it's where this nexus is coming together. That is, that's the reality. If you're a small woman in a farm in northern Kenya, and you're trying to put your kids through school and raise children. This is and we can't afford for the world to deal in isolation while we figure these out. So if I could make, a real plea that we don't silo nutrition, food security, climate change, but we really look at where those intersections are. I think, when you're taking it to the grassroots level, that will be, very substantial in terms of what we can achieve.
Delicate balance there, the plea against siloing, but also not trying to solve all the problems of the world at once.
At the same time, so because if you put everything into the mix at once,
finding that nexus where it comes together. And Terry, that from listening to you does seem to be what you have achieved thus far, in finding those critical issues where there is this common ground and common will. Looking to the future now, looking forward, what do you hope for by way of private sector engagement in your challenges in Kenya?
For us, for the private sector, actually we are seeing there's more opportunity for them to support the government in terms of scaling up nutrition. Looking at the various interventions that are part of the movement, we did adapt micronutrient powders as a key intervention for complementary feeding. And here we are talking of about 4 million children to be receiving 60 sachets in 6 months. That is, it is not easy. It is not something that really even the government can be able to provide adequate funding for it. So we really need to go again around the table and develop models that will work. At the beginning, we are putting it through the health system. But as we go on, we need to move it out of the health system and into a sustainable model whereby now the mothers and the caretakers can be able to access at any time. Because we know that pipeline chain links, they do break, the drugs break, the immunization breaks. Even MNPs, if we keep it in government, it will continue breaking. So there are things that we need to work around with the industry, with the private sector to see how do we make them sustainable. The other day we did manage to get some funds from World Bank for ready-to-use therapeutic foods. And it really pained me because it's a loan. And we are importing all the RUTF from France. So all those dollars are again remaining out there. But don't we have potential in country? Private sector. Come and set up a factory in Kenya. The farmers can grow peanuts. The milk is produced in Kenya. Then you can be able to assist with just packaging it together and we can be able to retain some of that money in country. So there's a lot of opportunity where we can actually work together and address nutrition at the same time, stimulate our own economy.
Easy.
Thank you very much.
Easy.
Fantastic. A terrific invitation there for a business opportunity. Remember where you heard it first. If we could just turn to Bangladesh again, Mr. Kabir, could you give us your observations looking forward now to the future for private sector engagement in your country?
I think basically from our side, when we give more focus on like first 1,000 days, because we know that if the children is born underweight, if the pregnant woman is suffering from anemia and others, in fact this nutrition is going to be very lifelong. But so I think also the private sector, while they can intervene, like working in food or business, they can contribute to this in kind of creation of awareness, as well as provision of foods. What I mean is that some of the companies are now working in some areas where it really generates some employment, and that makes it easy for the poor sections to food available to them. I think this is an area. If they have responsibility, showing some responsibility, work in these areas and also come out in terms of complementing government programs in creation of awareness and others. And that will also address the issues of equity and create access. And that will solve that at least the people we are trying to target, also we can do it combinedly. We can have a side-by-side government. Also the private sector can also participate. So I think there are a good number of opportunities besides business and also to engage in some kinds of social responsibilities.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Tom, final thoughts from you.
I think we should remember what David Nabarro said last night, that we have upcoming in 2013 a set of unique opportunities to bring political focus on this issue and serious political commitment from a number of key governments, the UK, the US, Ireland, Netherlands, and the EU coming up with a nutrition communication later on in spring. And so we just have to make sure we use that opportunity, but all the time remembering that where it's going to critically matter, will there be a difference, is at national level. And we have to have both the political leadership, the structures, and the engagement with civil society and others at that national level.
Very good. I can't add to that except to thank you all for your terrific observations and insights into this critical area of cross-sectoral partnership and the role of leadership, and to invite you, the audience, to join me in thanking the panel.